There are moments that seem to stop time. They are so immense, so final, that they carve a deep line between before and after. August 6th, 2011 was one of those moments. For most of us, it was just another summer Saturday. But in the jagged mountains of Afghanistan and in the quiet heartland of America, it was a day of profound and shattering loss. The headlines that followed spoke of a tragedy on an epic scale. They told of a downed helicopter, of elite warriors lost in a single devastating blow. The numbers were stark, the loss historic. But behind every number, behind every headline, there is always a human story. A story of a life lived, of dreams pursued, of a path chosen. This is not just the story of a helicopter with the call sign Extortion 17. This is the story of a young man who chose to stand in its open door, a guardian between the sky and the earth, a protector of the heroes he flew with. He was a son, a friend, a mechanic who fell in love with the thunderous roar of a machine, and a soldier who answered a call that most of us will never hear. This is the story of Specialist Spencer C. Duncan and the journey from the quiet plains of Kansas to a fateful valley halfway around the world. To understand his sacrifice, we must first understand his life. The year 2011 was a fulcrum point in the war in Afghanistan. A decade had passed since the conflict began. The initial invasion had long since morphed into a grinding, complex counterinsurgency campaign. America and its allies were deep into the surge, a period of intensified operations designed to break the Taliban's momentum and bolster the fragile Afghan government. The strategy relied on kinetic strikes, night raids, and the constant movement of troops by air. In this landscape, the helicopter was not just a vehicle, it was a lifeline. And no helicopter was more critical than the CH-47 Chinook. With its tandem rotors and cavernous cargo bay, it was the unglamorous but indispensable workhorse of the war. These machines and their crews ferried soldiers into impossible terrain, evacuated the wounded, and delivered tons of vital supplies. They were a constant presence in the skies, a symbol of American power. But they were also a target. The Tangi Valley in Wardak Province was a place where this conflict was fought at its most visceral. A narrow, winding gorge carved through the mountains. It was known to coalition forces as a hornet's nest, a key infiltration route for insurgents moving toward the capital, Kabul. It was a Taliban stronghold, a place where the enemy knew the terrain, had the loyalty of local populations, and could melt away into a network of caves and fortified compounds. Flying into the Tangi Valley was a calculated risk every single time. The high canyon walls limited maneuverability and created a perfect channel for ambushes. Just 3 months before our story takes place in May of 2011, the world had been electrified by the news that SEAL Team 6 had successfully raided Osama bin Laden's compound in Pakistan. The unit became legendary overnight, the public face of American retribution and special operations prowess. This success, however, cast a long shadow. It elevated the SEALs to near mythical status, but it also placed a massive target on their backs. The Taliban and its allies were hungry for revenge, eager to prove that even America's most elite warriors were vulnerable. This was the volatile, high-stakes world that a 21-year-old from Kansas was about to fly into. Spencer C. Duncan was born on February 19, 1990, and grew up in Olathe, Kansas. It's a place that embodies the American heartland, a thriving suburb of Kansas City, a community built on family, faith, and football. By all accounts, Spencer's childhood was a happy one. His parents, Dale and Megan Duncan, fostered a home filled with love and support. Photos from his youth show a boy with an infectious, slightly mischievous grin, often surrounded by friends and family. He was part of a tight-knit family, close with his parents and his sister Sierra. Friends remember him as loyal, funny, and unfailingly kind, the kind of person who was always there for you, no matter what. He attended Olathe South High School, graduating in 2008. He was a typical teenager in many ways. He loved hanging out with his friends, was passionate about cars, and had a bright future ahead of him. But something else was stirring within him, a sense of purpose that looked beyond the familiar horizons of his hometown. His father, Dale, recalled that Spencer wasn't one for sitting still. He had a restless energy, a need to be doing something meaningful. While many of his peers were planning for college, Spencer was drawn to a different path. He felt a profound sense of patriotism, a quiet but firm conviction that he had a duty to serve his country. In a conversation with his parents, he laid out his plan with a maturity that belied his years. He wanted to join the military. In June 2008, just weeks after receiving his high school diploma, Spencer enlisted in the United States Army Reserve. His choice was deliberate. He wasn't chasing combat for the sake of it. He was drawn to a specific skill, a specific machine. He was going to be a helicopter mechanic, specifically a 15U, a CH-47 helicopter repairer. This decision reveals a core part of Spencer's character, a deep, almost obsessive fascination with how things work. And nothing fascinated him more than the CH-47 Chinook. To an outsider, it might seem like a hulking, awkward piece of machinery. But to Spencer, it was a marvel of engineering. He saw the beauty in its complexity, the two massive synchronized rotors that allowed it to lift incredible loads and perform maneuvers that seemed to defy physics. He immersed himself in his training. He wasn't content to just learn the basics. He wanted to know everything. He spent his free time poring over technical manuals, learning every bolt, every wire, every hydraulic line. His fellow soldiers and superiors quickly noticed his passion. He wasn't just doing a job, he was mastering a craft. He had a natural aptitude for it, a feel for the aircraft that couldn't be taught. He loved the smell of the hydraulic fluid and jet fuel, the intricate dance of machinery, and the immense power simmering within the airframe. But being on the ground, fixing the helicopters wasn't enough. Spencer's heart was in the sky. Every time a Chinook lifted off, he would watch it go, feeling a pull to be on board, to be part of the mission in the air. He saw the crew chiefs and the door gunners, the men who were the masters of the aircraft in flight. He saw the door gunner in particular as the ultimate expression of service, a protector standing exposed to the world, a vital link in the chain of survival for everyone on board. The role of a door gunner is one of the most demanding and dangerous jobs in military aviation. It requires a unique blend of skills. You are a lookout, constantly scanning the ground for threats. A flicker of movement, the glint of a weapon, the telltale puff of smoke from an RPG launch. You are a communicator, relaying vital information to the pilots over the roar of the engines and rotors. And you are a warrior, responsible for laying down accurate suppressive fire from a machine gun, often while the helicopter is moving, banking, and vibrating violently. It is a position of extreme vulnerability. You are tethered to the aircraft, but otherwise you are completely exposed to the elements and to enemy fire. The psychological pressure is immense. Yet this is what Spencer Duncan wanted. He actively sought it out, volunteering for the additional training, pushing himself to qualify. His dedication was relentless. He mastered the M240 machine gun, learned the intricate dance of aerial gunnery, and proved to his commanders that he had the calm head and steady hands required for the job. His father, Dale, later said he loved being a door gunner. That was his passion. He got to be in the action. He got to be protecting his guys. This wasn't a job to Spencer. It was a calling he had pursued with single-minded focus. In March of 2011, that calling led him to the other side of the world. Spencer's unit, the 7th Battalion, 158th Aviation Regiment, was deployed to Afghanistan in support of Operation Enduring Freedom. At 21 years old, Specialist Spencer Duncan was now on the front lines of the war, living the life he had so passionately chosen. He was flying missions almost daily, a key member of a tight-knit flight crew, putting his skills to the test in the most challenging environment on Earth. Which brings us back to August 6th, 2011. The mission began hours earlier, under the cover of darkness. A platoon of U.S. Army Rangers was inserted into the Tangi Valley to hunt down a senior Taliban leader named Qari Tahir and his followers. The intelligence suggested they were in a specific compound, but from the moment the Rangers hit the ground, the mission went sideways. The enemy was waiting, and in greater numbers than expected. A fierce firefight erupted. The Rangers were pinned down, taking casualties. The initial target, Qari Tahir, had managed to slip away, but his fighters were putting up a disciplined and ferocious resistance. The call went out for the Quick Reaction Force, or QRF. This is a standard military practice, a heavily armed elite unit held in reserve, ready to fly in and reinforce troops in trouble. On this night, the QRF was composed of some of the most formidable soldiers on the planet. From the U.S. Navy, there were 17 members of the Naval Special Warfare Development Group, SEAL Team 6. They were accompanied by 5 Naval Special Warfare Support personnel and 8 Afghan commandos they had trained. This was the A-Team. Many of the SEALs on board were veterans of the bin Laden raid just 3 months prior. They were the best of the best, sent to rescue their fellow warriors. The aircraft assigned to carry them was a CH-47D Chinook from Spencer's unit, with the call sign Extortion 17. The flight crew consisted of 5 men from the Army Reserve's 7158 Aviation. The pilots in command were Chief Warrant Officer 4 David R. Carter, a veteran with thousands of flight hours, and Chief Warrant Officer 2 Brian J. Nichols, a skilled pilot in his own right. The flight engineer was Staff Sergeant Patrick D. Hamburger, and the 2 crew chiefs responsible for the cabin and manning the machine guns were Sergeant Alex Bennett, and at the right-hand door, Specialist Spencer C. Duncan. As Extortion 17 lifted off from its forward operating base, the mood inside would have been one of focused intensity. 38 men, Americans and Afghans, were packed into the belly of the Chinook, their gear and weapons filling every available space. For Spencer, perched at his station, his world would have been a whirlwind of sensory input. The deafening roar of the twin rotors, the vibration the airframe through the soles of his boots, and the cool night air rushing past him. His job was to watch. His eyes would have been scanning the dark, rugged landscape below, sweeping across the mud-walled compounds, the rocky outcrops, and the deep shadows of the Tangi Valley. He was looking for any sign of threat, his hands resting on the grips of his M240 machine gun. He was the guardian at the gate. The flight into the landing zone was tense. The pilots were in contact with the Rangers on the ground, trying to pinpoint the safest place to land amidst an active gunfight. The valley was hot. This is where the story of Extortion 17 becomes shrouded in the fog of war and painful controversy. The official investigation that followed, along with years of analysis by journalists and military experts, has revealed a series of decisions and circumstances that combined to create a perfect storm of tragedy. First, there was the choice of aircraft. The SEALs often flew in highly modified MH-47 Chinooks, flown by the elite 1, 6th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, the Night Stalkers. These helicopters are equipped with advanced sensors, defensive systems, and terrain-following radar, specifically designed for dangerous, low-level infiltration missions. But on this night, for reasons that are still debated, a conventional Army Reserve Chinook was tasked with the mission. Extortion 17 was a capable aircraft with a skilled crew, but it lacked the specialized equipment of its special operations counterparts. Second, the decision was made to transport the entire QRF element in a single helicopter. This concentrated the risk. Losing one aircraft meant losing the entire rescue force. It was a gamble, weighed against the urgency of getting reinforcements to the Rangers on the ground as quickly as possible. As Extortion 17 made its approach to the landing zone, the pilots were forced to slow down and circle, looking for a safe place to land. This made them a slower, more predictable target. According to the investigation, the flight took around 4 minutes from entering the valley to the final fatal moment. 4 minutes in a kill zone. Down below, Taliban fighters were waiting. It's here that the most painful debate begins. Was it a trap? Some family members and outside analysts firmly believe the Taliban, possibly with inside help, knew the SEALs were coming. They argue that the enemy intentionally drew the Rangers into a fight and then waited, luring a high-value target into a pre-planned ambush. They point to reports of Taliban fighters massing in the area and letting a smaller medevac helicopter land and leave untouched just before Extortion 17 arrived, saving their best weapons for the bigger prize. The official military investigation, however, concluded that there was no evidence of a sophisticated trap. Their report states it was a matter of tragic luck. They argue that a group of Taliban fighters armed with rocket-propelled grenades simply got into a tactically advantageous position and fired at the approaching helicopter. Whatever the truth, what happened next is not in dispute. As Extortion 17 hovered or was flying at a low altitude and slow speed preparing to set down, 2 or 3 Taliban fighters emerged from a building. One of them shouldered an RPG-7. He aimed and fired. The rocket streaked through the night sky. The crew of Extortion 17 likely never saw it coming. The warhead struck one of the rear rotor blades. The impact was catastrophic. The blade disintegrated, sending massive vibrations through the entire helicopter. The rear rotor assembly tore loose from the fuselage. In a split second, Extortion 17 became uncontrollable. It pitched violently and plunged into the dry riverbed below, exploding on impact. The crash was unsurvivable. In an instant, 38 lives were extinguished. Specialist Spencer C. Duncan died at his post, doing the job he loved, protecting the men behind him. The loss of Extortion 17 was the single deadliest incident for U.S. forces in the entire Afghanistan war. The news sent a tidal wave of shock and grief across the United States and the military community. It was a brutal reminder, just as the nation was celebrating the victory over bin Laden, that the war was far from over and that its price was still being paid in blood. The aftermath was a blur of grief and investigation. The military launched a massive operation to secure the crash site and recover the remains of the fallen heroes. In Washington, President Obama spoke of a devastating loss, vowing that their sacrifice would not be forgotten. But for the families, the pain was just beginning. In Olathe, Kansas, 2 Army officers arrived at the home of Dale and Megan Duncan. It is the moment every military family dreads. Their world shattered. Their beloved son, the boy with the infectious grin who loved helicopters, was gone. The community of Olathe wrapped its arms around the Duncan family. The grief was personal, but it was also shared. Spencer was their son, their neighbor, their friend. His story became a symbol of the town's contribution to the nation's defense. Specialist Spencer C. Duncan was laid to rest with full military honors at Fort Leavenworth National Cemetery. He was posthumously awarded the Bronze Star and the Purple Heart. But his legacy is much more than the medals on a uniform or a name carved into a headstone. His legacy lives on in the memories of those who knew him and in the story of his unwavering commitment. In the years since the tragedy, Spencer's parents, Dale and Megan, have channeled their grief into a powerful mission of their own. They have spoken with incredible grace and strength about their son, not to focus on the politics or controversies of the war, but to ensure that the human being at the heart of the story is remembered. They established the Spencer C. Duncan Foundation, dedicated to supporting veterans and their families, creating a living legacy of service in their son's name. Dale Duncan has often shared a detail that speaks volumes about his son's character. He said Spencer was a black and white kind of person. "There's no gray in Spencer," he explained. "It was either right or it was wrong. And if it was wrong, he was going to tell you it was wrong. If it was right, you were his best friend." That clarity, that moral compass, is what guided him into the Army, what drove him to master his craft, and what gave him the courage to stand in the door of a Chinook flying into danger. The historical significance of the Extortion 17 tragedy is complex. It was a tactical disaster that led to soul-searching within the special operations community about procedures and risk assessment. It was a propaganda victory for the Taliban, and it was a sobering moment for the American public, a stark punctuation mark in a long and costly war. But the deeper significance lies in the 38 individual stories of the men on board. They were fathers, husbands, sons, and brothers. And among them was Specialist Spencer Duncan, a 21-year-old from America's heartland who represented the very best of his generation. He wasn't a SEAL or a Ranger, but he was the man they entrusted with their lives. His role as a door gunner was not a supporting one, it was essential. Without the courage and skill of men like Spencer, the elite forces could not do their job. He was a critical part of a team, and he fulfilled his duty to the very last. When we think of heroes, we often picture the dramatic charge, the moment of overt cinematic bravery. But heroism is often quieter than that. Sometimes, heroism is a high school graduate choosing service over comfort. It's the long hours spent in a hangar, learning a machine until it's an extension of yourself. It's the quiet determination to take on one of the most dangerous jobs imaginable, not for glory, but for the love of your craft and the protection of your comrades. Spencer Duncan's life was not defined by its end. It was defined by the choices he made, by the passion he pursued, and by the courage he displayed every time he stepped into that helicopter. His story asks us to look past the grand narratives of war and see the individuals. It reminds us that for every soldier, there is a family, a hometown, and a life story filled with promise. The journey from a peaceful field in Kansas to a war-torn valley in Afghanistan is a long one. Spencer Duncan walked that path with honor, dedication, and a clear sense of purpose. He was a young man who knew what he believed in, and he gave his life in service to those beliefs. In remembering him, we honor not just a soldier, but the enduring spirit of selfless service that he so perfectly embodied. That's a wrap for today's video. If you enjoyed it, smash that like button, drop us a comment below, and don't forget to subscribe so you'll never miss our new content. Thanks for watching.